Quadragesimo Anno is an encyclical on social reconstruction. Its main emphasis is on the economic structure and systems, specifically capitalism, socialism, and communism. However, in order to understand it, we must first comprehend what an economy is. Some define economy as a trade industry where the wealth of the countries depend. Some say it is all about the wealth and the resources of a country. But what is economy in simpler terms? Economy refers to an interrelated system of production and consumption which decides the allocation of each good and service in a country. According to Future Learn, in order for an economy to work, it needs to consist of markets to allocate scarce resources, sellers to sell goods and services, and of course, consumers to avail goods. These consumers are the key to a growing economy. They pay taxes, employ labor, and buy goods and products. They express their needs and wants, which the seller sees as opportunities to bring more into the market and expand the economy's reach. You might be one of the consumers who buy out of their own accord when a new, improved, and innovative version of a product is released. Are you one of those waiting for the newest iPhones to be released, or a K-pop fan who is into buying merchandise? Maybe you're someone who rides public transportation or uses public infrastructures. Either way, turn the volume up because this video is for you.
In an economy, several systems were present, running and paving their way to create more money and assets through different means. These are called economic systems, and we will feature 3 of these systems in this video and explain the things you need to know. First off, we have capitalism. Capitalism is an economic system, but it is also a cultural system. It's characterized by innovation and investment to increase wealth. According to Joyce Appleby's definition of industrial capitalism, it is an economic system that relies on investment of capital in machines and technology that are used to increase production of marketable goods. To understand capitalism, imagine that you created a machine that works or produces 10 times than an ordinary one at the same price as the ordinary one. You would want to invest in the new machine due to its productivity and lower costs. At the same time, capitalism also had its drawbacks. Capitalism increased the privatization of lands by landlords, which in turn increased productivity and goods. And in the law of supply and demand, when goods or supply increases, the prices at the market decreases. This also had a domino effect which decreased the number of laborers, increasing poverty due to the lack of income because of unemployment. Additionally, we also have child labor, dangerous working conditions, and arduous tasks. In biblical standpoint, the Bible doesn't conform with any economic system. Actually, the Bible doesn't teach that wealth is wrong, but that the love of it is. Just as written in 1 Timothy chapter 6 verse 10, "For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil." And some people, craving money, have wandered from the true faith and pierced themselves with many sorrows. Similarly, Quadragesimo Anno condemns economic dictators of capitalistic systems because of their abuses of the working class. This means that greed, in the form of oppressing laborers or even mechanizing children for profit, is capital for condemnation. On the other hand, the Bible also teaches us that we should be generous with what abundance we have. It shows us how to look after the poor, the sick, and the vulnerable. It teaches us to share. It teaches that to whom much is given, much is required. This is when we utilize capitalism as a means of generosity.
Socialism is a political and economic theory of social organization which advocates that the means of production, distribution, and exchange should be owned or regulated by the community as a whole. The analogy of socialism. Assume that the whole class is given a test. No one would fail or obtain an A since all grades would be averaged and everyone would receive the same grade. Everyone received a B after the first test when the grades were averaged. The pupils who worked hard in the class were upset, while the kids who didn't study as much were pleased. However, by the time the second test arrived, the students who had studied little had done even less, and others who had worked hard to prepare decided they also wanted a free ride, so they had studied little. The average on the second test was a D. Nobody was content. The average grade was an F when the third test came up. The scores never improved since everyone stopped studying for the benefit of others because of arguments, finger-pointing, and name-calling, which caused resentment. To sum it all up, the reason why socialism would ultimately fail is that under capitalism, when the incentive is enormous, people will work very hard to succeed. But when the government levels the playing field and reduces the price even further, no one will want to work as hard or strive as hard to succeed. The socialist experiments of the 20th century had a sincere desire to make life better for the common people, but the outcomes brought about immense pain in the form of economic hardship and political tyranny. The egalitarian principles that sparked the socialist experiments, however, still hold a lot of intellectual and moral appeal. And while democratic capitalism has shown to be more appealing than socialism, many of socialism's most normatively appealing features have been absorbed into democratic systems, as shown by public support for spending on social programs. The employment of market-based systems where managers are allowed to run their company's affairs in accordance with supply and demand is the suggested solution to socialism's difficulties, rather than those of a central authority. The challenge with this approach is that it has more political than economic needs, as the acceptance of the market system in charge of coordinating the majority of economic activity necessitates the acceptance of a private authority apart from the public authority. In order for a market mechanism to work in a society based on socialist ideals, socialist societies would need to be drastically reformed. When socialist governments rely on market coordinative mechanisms, they will run into problems since economic decentralization and political centralization are incompatible. The implementation of a labor market mechanism is likely to intensify class conflicts between employees and management. Some socialist reformers attempted to alleviate these tensions by enhancing worker participation in fair management. The drawbacks of socialism. Some of the most common objections leveled at socialism include assertions that it produces distorted or non-existent price signals, reduces incentives, reduces prosperity, has limited practicality, and has bad social and political consequences. The national economy grows at a modest pace. There is a failure to maximize profit through the use of resources, labor, and land. Places with a geographical advantage lose opportunities to develop better, and people with brains and riches lose opportunities to grow their businesses and become more powerful. People lose the motivation to work and passion to learn when they are not rewarded for achieving more. The biblical truth against socialism. In accordance to Gary's 2021, the eighth commandment is central to the moral case against socialism and quasi-socialist. You must not steal, according to Exodus chapter 20 verse 15, Deuteronomy chapter 5 verse 19. This order educates about private property and prohibits taking property from an innocent person. In the 10th commandment, God added to this condemnation of socialism by forbidding envy. You are not to covet, according to Exodus chapter 20 verse 17 and Deuteronomy chapter 5 verse 21. God is a capitalist, as evidenced by his support for private property. The eighth commandment implies this. The restriction on theft presume that people own their possessions. Of certainty, God owns everything in this universe. Nonetheless, he has given control and responsibility to humans. This is referred to as private property rights. The welfare state and quasi-socialism are morally reprehensible because they usurp the function of other governing realms, particularly the family and the church. True charity is selfless. It provides people with the opportunity to offer and assist those in need. The welfare state does not aid the poor, but rather destroys them and creates disabled individuals. Karl Marx formulated his theory of history, which he saw a complex series of class struggles that would lead unavoidably to the overthrow of the bourgeoisie by the proletariat. The class struggle here is between capitalists who want labor at the lowest possible price and the workers who want to be paid as much as possible for their work. Communism is a political theory derived from Karl Marx, advocating class war and leading to a society in which all property is publicly owned and each person works and is paid according to their abilities and needs. The analogy of communism. The whole mechanism of communism can be related through the use of two cows. Suppose you raise two cows in your farm, but once they reach maturity, you are entitled to surrender it to the state. Instead of receiving money from them, you receive a product that is made from your own produce, which is milk. In communism, there is no concept of private property. The only entity with the authority to distribute items from the general pool of property owned by the country is the state or the government. Each citizen only receives what they require and is paid in accordance with their needs and abilities. The ultimate objective is to eliminate social classes while equally distributing the benefits of citizen labor. In a communist's perspective, communism would reduce the gap between the rich and the poor, put an end to worker exploitation, and free the oppressed. Issues regarding communism. Communism does not necessarily place importance on the individual improvement of economic standing. Since it is the government that dictates the means and quality of production, individuals do not have what it takes to get richer. The state also owns businesses in this setup, so every person receives the same amount of compensation for their work. The communism setup creates uncomfortable conditions for workers. Since everyone is paid equally, the absence of monetary motive might lead to emotional dissatisfaction, eventually lowering working class productivity. It would also be challenging to adequately meet everyone's concerns in property distribution because everyone is geographically diverse. Communism places its citizens' entrepreneurial spirit in a box, which can be a hindrance to a country's economic development. Instead of eradicating social classes, there is a power struggle between elite members of the government and the individuals of the working class. Because the dominant class controls the superstructure, it is, by extension, able to control the members of the working class. The biblical truth against communism. Communism kills generosity. This truth comes from the idea that in communism, people give a portion of their wealth out of compulsion rather than an act of giving. Early churches were not forced to give their private property, but they give it out of love and glorification of God. At the same time, their way of giving is not for the distribution of wealth among the community, but is used to help or to give to those who need it the most. On the other hand, communism forces everyone to give. This makes everyone impoverished. As it is written in the Bible, give as he has decided in his heart, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver, according to 2 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 7. This biblical text gives light to the importance of an outpouring heart that is willing to share and to invite, just like Jesus.
The Communist Manifesto, written by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, was first published in 1848. It formed the basis for modern communist movement as we know it, arguing that capitalism would inevitably self-destruct to be replaced by socialism and ultimately communism. Moreover, drawbacks in each economic system can be observed. In capitalism, the entire system was inherently based against labor. The capitalists held power and ultimate control over employees' time, causing the working class to be permanently estranged from their employment. Socialism produces distorted or non-existent price signals, reduces incentives, reduces prosperity, has limited practicality, and has bad social and political consequences. Communism directly controls the means of production, imposing stringent laws on how firms work. It has the potential to make working conditions difficult for workers with no hierarchy or varying expertise. Thus, it can be a hindrance to the citizens' entrepreneurial spirit, which is critical to a country's economic growth and progress. Even though each economic system strived to create an oppression-free leadership and trade, it somehow defeated its purpose due to the presence of unintentional biases to certain social classes. These three pose as an exemplary situation that aiming for perfection and ideality somehow leads to disparity. Hence, a balance of these three economic systems can truly be an ideal solution for both the nation and.
Now let's talk about Quadragesimo Anno. Quadragesimo Anno was written by Pope Pius XI in 1993. This means in the 40th year, and it was written 40 years after the Rerum Novarum. This was written aiming to fight social injustices like capitalism, socialism, and communism. Pope Pius XI discussed through this encyclical the ethical implications of economic and social order, tackling the dangers of the three ideologies to the freedom of humanity. As capitalism tolerates child labor, dangerous working conditions, and arduous tasks, socialism shows an elitist mindset, and communism allows violence and abolishes private property. Quadragesimo Anno seeks for the reformation of the social order based on the principle of solidarity and subsidiarity. Subsidiarity is a principle which refers to the help of the government to the people. Some examples are the public schools and public health centers in a community which is accessible for the people. Another one is the Pantawid Pamilyang Pilipino program or PORPIS, which aims to help poor families by giving them funds. Solidarity, on the other hand, is the help given by the community itself. One great example is the Angat Buhay program, which aims to assist the people of the country and fight poverty while showing bayanihan through volunteerism.
The different economic systems proposed by various intellectuals are in theory extreme. There are a set of boundaries that defines which is which. So it is difficult to enclose the system of a country to a specific theory. However, there exists commonality amongst them. So most people generally look at it in a way of analyzing a spectrum. The biggest drawback uniting them is the fact that all economic setups have a tendency to be disadvantageous to the working class, even if they are meant to be beneficial to everyone. For example, capitalism is best described as a free market, in which consumers have freedom to purchase goods while the industry is dominated by private property. Even if this notion is admirable, it results in a significant economic divide between the few individuals who control the global economy and the rest of the world. Socialism, on the other hand, manifests slow economic growth, less entrepreneurial opportunity and competition, and the lack of desire to lower benefits. Communism, which is believed to be achieved alongside socialism, creates a power struggle between the social classes instead of its purpose of eradicating the concepts of bourgeoisies and proletariats, and redefining and reforming the way society distributed its resources among the classes. Pope Pius XI, in his encyclical Quadragesimo Anno, urges the reconstruction of the social order. It criticized unrestrained capitalism and socialism, and reaffirmed workers' rights to organize into unions and earn a just compensation. The wealth of a country is derived directly from its citizens' labor. People should use their wealth for the greater good and to assist the less fortunate, because the value of labor equals the value of the items it produces. Workers should be compensated enough to support themselves and their families. Although it is difficult to say that each country specifically follows an economic theory, because each system can be intertwined, we urge you to think about what would work best in our nation. What would you, a Christian or a citizen, do in order to ensure a just economic society?